Well, I want to say thank you again to OU for having us here and for bringing this great group of people together. You all are probably wondering, like Dr. Jackson and Dan Burden, who is this guy? You certainly haven't heard of me, haven't written any books, don't have a famous father, but I've been a student of these gentlemen and some of the other speakers for the last decade or more, and have had the pleasure of working with some of them. In fact, Dan and I worked on plans in Charlotte for making it easier for people to bike and walk to the light rail system. But I want to thank them for the contributions that they've made to increasing the discourse in the United States on these very important issues, and thank OU for having us here. And probably very likely you haven't also heard of the company that I work for, which is a small company called Alta Planning and Design. We are dedicated to working with communities to become more walkable and bikeable, and have worked all over the world. But hope that you have heard of some of the things that we've worked on, and some of the things that we've contributed to, and that's, I think, really what we're the most proud of, and helping communities get plans implemented. We have the good pleasure to work here at OU on a bicycle master plan, but I think what we are most proud of is when communities actually get things built that we help create designs for, and we're very proud of helping communities raise money to build the visions that they've defined, over $120 million that we've helped for implementation. Hopefully, Dr. Jackson has convinced you kind of about the health side of this argument about the healthy reasons for creating more walkable and bikeable communities. And I'm glad that OU suggested this title of Pedaling Towards Healthy Communities. So Dr. Jackson has covered the public health and the individual health side, so I won't touch on that. The environmental health, I think, has been fairly well covered. I don't think there's any argument about that. But I do want to talk about both the civic and social and economic health that cycling can bring to communities. And in the absence of a metric, and I'm sure Ethan and Project for Public Spaces or someone is working on a happiness or fun index, which would be very valuable. But in the absence of that, so much of what our decision makers are thinking about these days is economic health of communities and individuals. And I'm glad to report that there's a new paradigm in how communities are building better places to bicycle and to walk, and that governments are realizing that they can't get it all done on their own, and that they need to partner with their business community and with their advocates and their nonprofits. And so I'm going to share some stories about some communities, some in this part of the world and other areas that are doing that quite well. The developers already know the answer to this question. They know, the good developers know what Christopher Leinberger talked about this morning, is that people want to live in places with good bicycling and walking amenities, and they are spending in the free market economy their investment dollars to create places that have those amenities, like this development outside of Charlotte in Rock Hill, North Carolina, that has a velodrome, one of the only velodrome between New York and Florida, a mountain bike park, trails, all as a centerpiece of their mixed-use development, and people are flocking to that development. Mayors and city leaders know this, and they know that to attract the kind of talent and keep the talent, keep the businesses and attract new businesses, that biking and walking are part of that toolbox. And this is a quote from the mayor of Minneapolis, which is in a very, very, what would appear to be a very inhospitable biking climate, one of the best biking cities in the United States, one of just 3 platinum level bicycle friendly communities in the United States. And one of the things that is helping to fuel the transformation in bicycling in the US and North America is this little $45 book that our company is proud to have helped to develop. It's a beautiful book called The Urban Bikeway Design Guide. I would argue that this is one of the most important things that has happened for urban bicycling in the United States since the paving of urban roads at the turn of the last century, which was something that bicyclists advocated heavily for. And this is a document that is $45 in hard copy, or free on the internet, by the way. But it's a document that these leading cities, planners and engineers and elected officials from these cities have helped to develop. The National Association of City Transportation Officials, which is a parallel organization to AASHTO, which is state highway transportation officials. But for so long, our urban streets were defined by highway standards built for rural areas. And so now there is a Bible for building bikeways in cities that complements the work of AASHTO and the FHWA, and so one of the most important things to happen for bicycling. And one of the basis for what is in this guide is the understanding that there are at least 3 types of cyclists. There are the folks that are already out there that you don't need to build any special facilities for. Then there's another 7 to 9% who are going to be encouraged to ride on urban streets when you provide things like an extra 4 or 5 feet in the form of a bike lane. But very often this bike lane, requires riding single file, requires often riding next to parked cars and moving cars. And so there's this big population, and that's where when I'm riding with my kids, my mother, my wife, that's most of us, there's just 60% of us who don't want to ride even in a bike lane if we have to share that space with moving motor vehicles. And so this guide was developed to reach that audience. And then there's another 30%, and this matches up well with research from Europe, who aren't going to ever bike. But reaching that 60% can be transformative in countering some of the issues that Dr. Jackson presented. This is the kind of biking that most of us would like to do. Americans own more bicycles than the Chinese. We're happy biking in events on quiet streets or streets that have been closed off for cars. Or streets like this that most of us live on in our neighborhoods, which make up 85% of most urban street networks, but in many cases are disconnected because of lack of local street connectivity, or these kinds of fully separated bikeways that are popping up all over. They've been in existence for a long time in places like Montreal in Northern Europe, but are popping up all over in the United States. And even in the most unlikely places. This is from New York City. And here's a page from the NACTO guide, very colorful, includes research from the best national and international sources, case studies, and great drawings that engineers and planners and advocates can understand. But this is a chart from the Green Lane project showing the rapid rise of these types of separated, family-friendly projects that are happening across the United States. And you can see that it's dramatic. Just in the last, between 2011 and 12, almost doubling. And this was a discussion that just a few years ago, in most cities, it was, you weren't even allowed to talk about bikeways that were beyond a bike lane. You could talk about paths and you could talk about bike lanes, but that's where the discussion ends. But even here at OU, in the Oklahoma pioneering spirit, discussions of opportunities for separated bikeways on campus. This is from the master plan that we worked on, and this is a concept from the master plan that OU is currently looking at developing what is probably what will be the first buffered bike lane in Oklahoma, and probably one of the first buffered bike lanes in this greater region, providing greater safety, security, comfort for the users of that street. They're also great low-tech, low-cost, I forgot what Ethan's, fast, cheap, light methods that are ways to link neighborhoods using your existing neighborhood low-volume street network through simple things like signage and traffic calming and getting your intersections right. And so a full spectrum. And so just want to talk a little bit about some communities that are developing and building a vision of better urban bikeways. Dallas, a vision of 1,300 miles of bikeway network in the next decade. Atlanta wants to one of the most unbikeable places you could ever visit or spend time in, has a goal of 120-mile bikeway network just in the next 3 years. 60 of those, they want to build 60 miles of separated bikeway in their downtown area alone. And this is one of the concepts for a major roadway in Atlanta. The separated bikeway you can see on the left, that is not coming from widening this road, but from using the excess capacity. And this is a project that is not the brainchild of wild-eyed advocates and planners at city government, but is a plan that's being supported by private business interests and municipal business districts as a way of creating more livable, more economically prosperous and healthy and more attractive places to live and work. This is another vision in the Charlotte region, 15 counties, 2 states, a network of over 1,200 miles of connected trails in a region of 2.3 million people. This is a vision that has been so powerful that the likes of Bank of America, the Lowe's Corporation, Duke Energy have put up $17 million to endow to see this vision come to reality. Birmingham, famous southern post-industrial city, just completed a bicycle master plan, bicycle and trail complete streets master plan for over 200 miles of trails and 500 miles of complete streets. Interesting partnership here. This was funded with money from the CDC. The local health department was one of the lead agencies, a land trust, a power company, and lots, a railroad company. And this is a vision that secured broad public support across all demographic groups, racial groups in an area that has been very divided along those lines. A vision so compelling that the federal government awarded them $11 million to help get this first phase begun. And those local private sector and nonprofit partners are helping to make it happen. And they're doing it for all of the same reasons. that you've heard other speakers talk about making their city more healthy in all of the ways, in terms of civic engagement, in terms of environmental goals, in terms of economic prosperity. Another example from the Southeast, Memphis, Tennessee, one of the poorest metro areas, major metro areas in the US, where a local commercial industrial district that had become an arts district with advocates decided to do temporary bikeways as part of a community festival to draw attention to this burgeoning district. And they did it without the blessing of the city staff and engineers who were not very much in favor of this type of thinking. And they used what was temporary paint. It was not so temporary because you can still see it on Google Earth today. But this was an inspiration. This tactical urbanism type of intervention by this neighborhood and local advocates became inspiration for a local foundation that was funded by the AutoZone fortune, which is headquartered in Memphis, to think about a way to create a permanent connection through this arts district, connecting a trail and a major park designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, a 2-mile connection, too far to walk, but a perfect bicycling distance to get those folks who were who had come to the end of this great new rail trail and had nowhere else to go, to get them to this arts district. And so this is now the design was paid for by a local nonprofit, now being advocated for by the mayor and city council to put money into getting it built. Closer to Oklahoma, your neighbors in northwest Arkansas built a vision for a 40-mile greenway to connect some of the communities there, Bentonville, Springdale, Rogers, Fayetteville, with an idea of, this was not about active recreation, although that's certainly a benefit. It was about connecting communities, about connecting to schools, about connecting to employers, major employers, and some of the same reasons that the other communities are making these kinds of investments, because the likes of Walmart and J.B. Hunt Trucking and Tyson's Food want to create better access for their workers who already live in the area, but they also want to make that area of northwest Arkansas attractive to people who might want to live, invest, retire in that region. Again, this vision had so much energy, it had so much local support, it had major support from the Walton Family Foundation that it was awarded an additional matching $15 million in stimulus funds to build it. And they're calling it the Razorback Greenway because it connects to the University of Arkansas. But this is one of the concepts that is part of that 40-mile network. And these signs already exist, these wayfinding signs in Bentonville, with Walmart as one of the corporate sponsors. And that concept came about in 2010. In 2012, the concept broke ground and is due to be finished later this year. Not only the impacts to health and recreation, all of the economic impacts, but tourism is bound to increase in that region as well. Where's our timekeeper? How are we doing on time? Are we doing okay? So cities are making this happen in lots of different ways. There are cities like Charlotte that have kind of institutionalized the complete streets and urban bikeway development and are doing a great job at the institutional level. But there are cities like Memphis where it's a much more bottom-up approach. I showed you that Broad Avenue slide. And after Broad Avenue was so successful, the city decided to get on board on the front end and take this idea to a whole nother neighborhood that needed reinvestment. And so the city, developers, and local artists came together to create this festival and put down what was truly, this time, temporary markings. And this was all part of, it wasn't just about bikeways, but it was about pop-up local businesses and kind of a total intervention and an event at a key intersection, and being able to try out on a temporary basis roadway and intersection treatments to make that district safer and more attractive. And then again in Memphis, a local entrepreneur has put his own money into designing a feasibility study for this bicycle and pedestrian bridge over the Mississippi River, which is now going to construction again with, going to construction this year, a mile-plus long bridge to connect Arkansas and Tennessee by foot and by bike in a place that was not accessible that way before. Again, AutoZone and the likes of FedEx putting their investments in that idea. So, but it's not just about building infrastructure, you have to build the bike culture, and it happens through events like these tactical urbanism, better block events, or these open streets events. Atlanta has, in the space of less than a year, doubled the number of people attending one of their open streets, ciclovia events that are simply designed to celebrate the public space and walking and biking and being outdoors. Bike share is another thing that is part of transforming bike culture. Oklahoma City already has a small system, but these systems are transforming cities by just putting bikes in the hands of people who are visiting, who work there, who live in these downtowns. It's putting more women on bikes, creating better biking business, if you can believe it. More retail biking is happening, increasing transit usage, reducing the number of people that are using cars to get around downtowns. And this is a business and a concept that essentially did not exist in the United States 3 years ago. And now there are dozens, literally dozens of systems in place and more happening. And in many places being financed entirely or in large part by user revenue and private sponsorship. It is one of the few publicly accessible transportation systems that can claim, in Washington, D.C.'s case, to be in the black, supported by user revenue and memberships. So important to invest in all these kinds of things, but you also have to invest the time, and this is kind of the easy and the cheap part in calculating the benefits. In New York, if they can do it in New York, it can happen anywhere. Safer streets, more people biking. The number of people biking has kind of direct inverse relationship with the number of injuries and casualties, and that relationship has been shown in cities around the world. But interestingly, they've also been looking at the economic impact and looking at increases and seeing increases in retail sales on the corridors where they've implemented these separated bikeways, as in 9th Avenue. Cities like Vancouver, BC, and others have seen similar trends. The folks that have been looking at these types of projects have calculated, of course, the health benefits, the environmental benefits, but there's also the household transportation savings that Jeff and others have talked about, and the creation of jobs. And I think I'm going to stop there and give time to Dan, but this evaluation measure is critical to whatever you do. The induced demand for, just like the induced demand for driving is real, the induced demand for biking and walking is real. If you build it, they will come. And I thank you very much for your time and your interest.